say, you know what, this is foolish. No amount of guns or security cameras or any of this stuff will stop that. I'm in the hands of the living God, of Yahweh. And nothing they can do to me will override that. And so if he wants me in jail, or if he wants me out here, if he wants the message carried, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to ask for wisdom. Because wisdom is far more valuable, as the Proverbs teaches us, as God teaches us. It's far more valuable than gold and silver and treasure. And we completely lack wisdom in this country. I mean, look, I like, traveling. I like nature. I mean, I'm a image maker by trade who's always having to deal with this stuff. But, I'm a human. I like things, and I like a successful business and a nice place for my family to stay. But you know what? America is not a place of peace anymore. I can't even go on road trips anymore without looking up in the sky and wondering, what's that helicopter doing? Are they coming for me? Folks, let's get serious. We are more like a third world country. In fact, a lot of the third world countries are starting to look better. Yes, they're poorer, but in many ways, they're better than ours. We have a country whose government and police killed 1,500 people last year.
Not to mention the babies.
Yeah, not to mention the countless babies. Let's not leave them out. And let's be very clear about this then. I see we got a few trolls, but overall the chat's been a lot better tonight. Less viewers. Nobody wants to hear the truth. Let's be very clear. We will not have liberty until we stop abortion. You cannot say, and let me talk to the Libertarian Party. Let's talk to the Liberty Movement. The reason we're failing is because we're not really defending liberty. Now, we're not all failing. The message in Oregon is still going on. Yeah, it didn't go exactly the way we want, but we haven't lost the message because we didn't give the narrative to the news media, and we're not going to. We're going to start controlling the narrative. But we need to get serious because, you have the abolitionists and the pro-lifers over here, and they're like, yes, we have to protect the unborn. And sometimes they're not as tenacious maybe as they should be about protecting the born. Although the abolitionists, they're pretty darn good about it. But then we have the Patriot movement, and they're like, well, yeah, I'm pro-life, but, let's focus on our guns. That's a message that people will receive. And so everybody playing politics says, well, we're just not going to talk about that. If you're not dealing with these things, let's be very clear. Let's shut down any of the abortion debate, okay? Because abortion is killing a person. You do not have the right to decide who's human. I've debated with people about this that are trying to debate it from a liberty perspective, and they say, well, yeah, I think abortion's murder after 20 weeks or whatever. And I'm like, well, how do you define that? Well, that's just kind of how I feel about it. You do not get to define who's human. And we failed at this for centuries. We've said, oh, the Indians aren't human. Oh, the blacks aren't human. Oh, the Muslims aren't human. You don't get to decide who's human. All men are created equal. And if you do not honor that, if you espouse that principle, but then you don't really stand for it, you're a hypocrite. And God will not honor our nation. And so we do not restore liberty. There's no way. We say, oh, ISIS is so terrible and they're going to come and destroy us. My greatest fear is not ISIS or our borders. We have destroyed our own nation. This nation right here, we have more blood on our hands probably than any nation in the world. Our government is the greatest nation, the greatest terrorists. Our judicial system are the greatest terrorists. They commit the most heinous crimes every day. You have no idea how many people are being abused from the womb, from cradle to grave. They're abusing and abusing and abusing. We've got to start defending liberty. If you support abortion, you don't defend liberty. There's an article about this on my site, callmegav.com. And it covers this. It destroys all the abortion arguments. But the bottom line is that we have a right to due process. And so if you're going to say, hey, he's not a human, that baby does not have to prove he is a human. You have to prove he's not. And you can't, and you never will, because science has proven the opposite. You know, people say, well, what about rape? There's no exception for rape. None. There's been so many lies handed down about abortion that many have come to believe them as true. And if an injustice is laid on you, that never gives you the right to serve an injustice on another, to abuse another. There's a quote, because I'm not the best qualified to say this. Rebecca, I think it's Keisling, who is a speaker who was conceived in rape, says, when you make that rape exception, it's like you're saying to me that I deserve the death penalty for the crimes of my father. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, my father didn't even deserve the death penalty. The Supreme Court has said there is no death penalty for rapists, but you say that I, as an innocent child of rape, deserve the death penalty? How dare you say that an innocent deserves to die? Because somebody else did something wicked. And so I'm just kind of looking at the chat, and people are saying, wow, Gavin, I'm unsubscribing. You know what? If you support abortion, unsubscribe. You do not support liberty. And I'm not going to play this game. We won't restore liberty unless we repent, America, unless we start standing up for what's right. And we saw that principle, that foundation in Oregon this last month. And if we want to keep that message going, we have to keep it principled. We can't make exceptions. We can't say, well, liberty, 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 but not for babies or not for Jews. I mean, this anti-Semitic trash is rubbish. You know, I support liberty, but man, those Jews, they're subhuman. I get this all the time from so-called patriots. I'm like, you're not a patriot. You don't love God. You don't love your neighbor. You're a liar. It's not about race. And some of the questions here, you know, what about race? What about Islam? It's not about race. It's not about religion. Now, don't get me wrong. Sharia law is absolute tyranny. And, you know, people like Shahram Hadian speak well on exposing the wickedness of Islam. But somebody still has a right to operate within a religion. Their right ends where yours begins. You judge individual actions. The problem with this nation is not Islam. It's America. It's Americans. It's us. We failed. Stop pointing the finger at Obama and Congress and Muslims and this guy and that guy and liberals and Black Lives Matter. We've all failed. Doesn't mean we don't hold these treasonous government officials accountable. But all we're seeing constantly from the Patriot movement, you know, when they get distracted, and we've seen a lot of unity this past month because of Oregon, but they get distracted and they're always pointing the finger at somebody. You know what? You want to restore liberty? Start pointing the finger at yourself. That includes me. It includes Nathan. It includes you. That's how we restore liberty. So as we wrap up here, I don't want to keep this much past an hour, and we've lost a few of you. It looks like we've lost a few percentage points in the polls here, and you know what? I don't care. This isn't about being popular. And so if the trolls, you know, if the haters of liberty want to hate, that's fine. I learned something recently when I watched Ammon and the Patriots in Oregon, when I watched the message go out, and the events of the past few months, and I started to realize something. Throughout the Bible, God used a tiny fraction of the populace. And we're always like, oh, well, we need to play to the news media. We need to make sure we don't offend people. No, we don't. We need to speak consistent, biblical, principled liberty that defends everybody's rights, including their right to not be biblical, as long as they're not violating the rights of another, including their right to not be a Christian. But I'm certainly not going to let that right impinge on my right to be a Christian. I'm not going to let it redefine the standards of God and institutions of religion. We're not going to let it redefine marriage, redefine what liberty is. You can't take an institution of the church and then give it to government and say, hey, control this institution, which is entirely a religious institution, but we have separation of church and state. The separation of church and state was not meant to keep principled godly men out of government. It was to keep the government out of the church. And the government through its 5013Cs, the church through its 5013Cs and its political pandering, they've advocated their authority. The government is there to protect life, liberty, and property. Full stop. That's it. Anything that does not do that is not law. The church is there to be the moral government. Now, don't take that the wrong way. Not to enforce morals at the point of a gun. See, a government is there to stop the violation of another's rights. And we can righteously defend ourselves and our rights. The church is not there to work by force, not of constraint, but willingly. The church is there to set the standard and the example and to be the voice, just like in 1775 in Lexington Concord, when the pastors were at the head of the line, standing up against the tyranny of the British. You see, we're not focused in this country on liberty. We're not focused on God. We're focused on self, and we're calling it liberty. And they say, well, it's hateful. Oh, you're just hateful. I don't hate. I'll leave that to God. I'm not qualified for that. But God does hate evil. And this nation is rampant and poisoned with evil. It's like tendrils just flowing through the entire nation. We are poisoned. Unless we get back to principles and values and morality, unless we start loving our neighbor, we will not have liberty. And loving your neighbor is not, well, I get to do what I want. Love is not, oh, do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. That's not love. Love is truth. God is love. And for all the pacifists out there who want to make excuses so they can sit back and do nothing, you know what? People in the Bible, all through the whole Bible, all the way through the apostles, they were getting arrested all the time. And you know what Jesus did? People say, well, Gavin, you shouldn't stand up in a courtroom. He went into the courtroom of the day. He was a lot bolder than I was. He went in with whips and cords into the temple, into their courts. And he threw them out. Try doing that to a crooked judge in this country. They'll label you a terrorist and lock you away for 20 years. Look at Jeff Winehouse, Schaefer Cox, James Fair, Skylar Barbeau, all our patriots in Oregon, and all the names we don't even know. Jeff Winehouse, they tried to murder him, guys. Do you even know about him? Do you support him? They tried to murder him. There's a video of it. I'm going to put a video on this again in a few days here to try and get some more attention to this. They gunned him down, and miraculously he survived. They charged him with assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon after they tried to assassinate him, much like Lavoy Finicum. And God said it wasn't his time to go. You know what they did to him? They put him in prison for 30 years. He calls me. He wants the message to get out. He wants people to know, because it's a heinous injustice. And we ignore the injustice of our neighbor. We say, oh, the courts are mostly just. No, they're not. What state's Jeff from?
Missouri.
Jeff's from Missouri, okay? This so-called crime, this pretended legislation, because there's nothing worse to the government than you opposing them. You can abuse other people pretty much all day long. I mean, sometimes a murderer will only get a few years, but if you oppose the government, they're going to throw away the key. And so for the crime that he obviously didn't commit, and it's even on video, and the FBI agents, some of them that were there even testified, oh, he never drew a gun. They didn't let those guys testify in court. Don't pretend to me that we have due process in our courts. They decide the evidence, the jury. They decide the forum. They feed them the donuts and the coffee. And then they say, oh, don't worry, you get due process. You do not get due process in our courts, because we've let that go. We've let liberty go. We've let this go. We've let the Bible go. We've let principle go. And so in Missouri, it's a greater crime in Missouri to assault an officer than it is to rape a 13-year-old. I want you to let that sink in a minute. Don't tell me that we have a government that has any part with justice. Yeah, they're about equal, Nathan says. He actually found that. It's an equal crime. Assaulting an officer, which of course Jeff didn't do. Don't tell me that a legislator who makes assaulting an officer an equal crime with raping a little girl, don't tell me they have any part with law or liberty. That's absolute rubbish.